Hi, good morning, everybody. Book Traveller again here. Today, talking to you from Florence, still in northern Italy. What a beautiful morning it is. A little bit misty start. Sun's just about to poke through the clouds, hopefully brighten up, and we can see some of the beauty. I'm stood beside the River Arno, which runs right through the middle of Florence, and some beautiful buildings and architecture on either side of the bank of the river itself, and I'll pop over the bridges later to have a look at some of the more exciting buildings. But I just thought it was a really nice spot here, just by the side of the river, to take a look at uh, just some of this little park here, an old church there in a little area, which is a nice place for us to hopefully have a quick read of another chapter of the Sanctuary. If I could just get across the road without getting knocked over. Never very good, but I'll pop ourselves over here, and then this is just a stunning little courtyard area. Even the design of the lampposts, which adorn either side of the river all the way down, absolutely stunning. Every little detail is thought about, even though a lot of it is very rustic. But there we are. Look at that beautiful old church chapel. Now, if you remember, I'm reading the Sanctuary today, and if you remember back to the early parts of the book. We're talking about Ben, the main character in the book, and Cara, and actually started their relationship together in Florence. So here we are. What a very apt place to read another couple of chapters of this book to you this morning. So enjoy the view as people go by, starting their day. Hopefully the sun will come out whilst I'm reading. So here we go with chapter 17 of The Sanctuary. We drove north in near silence for almost an hour. At one point we skirted an enormous lake, the eye in the centre of the island, Pemberley said. Huge birds I did not recognise stood by its edge, as immobile as ancient gods. I found myself almost wishing I was a landscape artist instead of a portraitist. We reached the northernmost point of the road. Beyond here, Pemberley explained, the terrain was kept wild, so the birds would go undisturbed. We were at the top of a range of hills that fell away northwards to the sea, and the plain between us and the ocean was crawling with life, thousands upon thousands of seabirds. The white and grey of their plumage shimmered back and forth, and above them hundreds of minuscule specks wheeled against the iron clouds. When I first came here, there weren't 1/50th of the birds you see today. Not 1/50th. We made this happen, all of us, living here. This is what the energy of youth can do. There was moisture in the corner of his eyes as he looked out. This is all thanks to getting rid of the rats. Entirely. A lot of people disagreed with me about it, told me the place was too far gone for salvage. You'll find no end of people willing to tell you to give up. Makes them feel better that they're not doing anything themselves. Why did you do it? Oh, the urge to create, I suppose, mixed with the urge to destroy, both crop up in equal measure. He wiped his face with a sleeve. I wondered what else there was to be destroyed now the rats had gone, but I kept this thought to myself. Seen enough? I nodded, and he got back behind the wheel. We drove on, but the silence was broken now, and there was so much more I wanted to know. What about the government? Are there inspectors? Who checks that the children are being taught? We had a lot of government inspectors in the early days. They thought I might be raising a private army, something daft. He shook his head. Then they realised how harmless I was, and they've left me alone. Paying taxes helps, of course. He seemed friendly enough now, just about. I judged it was time to ask about Lad. I heard there was going to be a biography of you. Then you were wrong. We get about one request a week for an authorised biography, long interview, broadcast debut. I turned them all down. Why? Ben, this is the most wonderful environment on the planet, and they want to focus on the life of the owner. What I drink, what my life was like before I came here, the colour of my shoes. Christ, spare me. That stuff. People's people's love lives, their family, all that rubbish. It's just a way of distracting them from things that matter. This one sounded like it would have been more about the things that matter, I think. A man called Kevin Ladd was behind it, a journalist. Ladd. Oh, come to think of it, yes, I have a vague memory of him approaching. He was a bit more persistent than the others, a bit more serious too, which is usually code for wanting to go through your finances. But it never happened. Great reprieve for the reading public, I'd say. Do you know why not? You'd have to ask Angela. She dealt with everything back then. I had the distinct impression that again Pemberley was lying to me. I'm sure Mr. Ladd has had a wonderful career without having to bother with me. He died, actually. I realised the stupidity of giving this away as soon as the words were out of my mouth. Pemberley kept steering, looking straight ahead. Been doing your homework on me, Ben. I'm sure you would do some homework if the person you loved had gone away and not told you whether they were coming back. That's just it. I have no need to do any homework. He took his hands off the wheel for a second, spread his arms. Everyone I love is here. The drive back south took longer than expected. We made several stops along the way, mostly to greet workers in different hexes. Everywhere Pemberley went, he was treated like a gentleman farmer, doing the rounds of his property, greeting his tenants, receiving answers to technical questions he'd asked on his last visit, asking new ones. He changed again, becoming more charming, less menacing, but always obviously in command. We visited the solar hex and the glassmakers, as well as a little mill that wove the island's crops into cloth. At the edge of each one, the thick line of trees waved their branches in gentle benediction. Between stops, I had a chance to ask Pemberley about how the hexes worked. Do you recruit people who know all about these areas already? Half and half. There are experts and there are apprentices. We try to make sure the apprentices have the potential to learn the skills of each place and pass them on. But we also try to keep it balanced. I remembered the discussion at the dinner table the other night. Do you only recruit people who've had trouble in their lives? Everyone's had trouble in their life. There just happens to be less of it once people get here. We drove on. I could tell from the sun that we were moving southwest in a rough parabola, skirting the edge of another area. Thick trees blocked the view and I saw some fencing too, the first since I got here. What's over there? Pemberley waved a hand vaguely. Biosecurity bit for the non-native plants. We can't have anything getting out, so the protocols are strict. Of course, Francis mentioned that. Pemberley seemed surprised. Francis told you? We're talking about the seed vault, aren't we? That's the same thing? Ah, the seed vault. Yes, well, that's in a different part of the island, but it's the same sort of thing. Got to keep the biosecurity high. So we're on the only invasive species with free rein here. He gave his short barking laugh and we drove on, curving southwest, then tending west. The way back took us to Francis and Joanna's hex, and Pemberley stopped the car before we entered. Above us, the light was starting to fail. Entre les chiens et le loup, he said. Pardon? The hour between the dog and the wolf, where you can't tell which is which. Just another way of saying dusk. He nodded. So, seen enough of my face? For the painting? Oh, yes, of course. The day had been so long and for so many new sights and impressions on me, I had almost forgotten the painting. But Pemberley himself probably couldn't have known that from the conversation we'd had, and I had been observing him after all, I think I've seen a lot of aspects I can draw on, yes. I was telling the truth at least. His face was, if not mobile, then versatile. When we had when he had calmed me by the amphitheatre, when he was challenging me about the villages, when he was furious at my questions about his family, all those moments had prompted expressions new to me. I just had no idea which of them, if any, was the real man. Excellent, I'll drop you here. He pushed the cart starter button and drove us into the hex. As we passed the threshold, a much larger vehicle, like an elder sibling to the carts, was coming the other way. It looked like a construction vehicle of some kind, with a revolving cylinder at the back of it, and Pemberley lifted a finger off the wheel in salute. The hex looked the same, but as I climbed out of the vehicle, Francis and Joanna's cottage seemed different somehow. I couldn't work out exactly what had changed about it, but Pemberley was already speaking. So you'll come to dinner tonight, and you start your portrait tomorrow, yes? Yes, of course. There'll be supplies? We'll arrange it. I was still distracted by the cottage. Has something changed here? He shrugged. You tell me. You're the close observer. And with that, he accelerated away. I looked at the cottage for a while before realizing what it was. The brick bulb on the outside that had contained the office space for the previous resident, Mad Thomas, had been swept off the building, as if a giant hand had battered it away. In its place was another extension, the same width, but rather higher, plastered white on the outside. I entered the cottage. The double doors between the office, the former office anyway, and the rest of the cottage were closed. I crossed the room and opened them, and felt for a moment as though I had travelled in time, that I had just got home from the Bywaters village a week previously. I was in my studio, the studio from our home in the city. Not merely an approximation of it, either. Exactly my studio, its dimensions, its walls. It was painted in the same white, had the same skylight in the same spot. The curtains, the furnishings, everything in it was identical. Even the brushes and easels and pots I used for my work had been placed here. I feared for a giddy second to look out of the windows in case they suddenly opened onto my usual view of the city, in case they revealed that the last week had been a dream. My paintings were there too, the completed ones as well as the half-finished ones, sitting there for lack of time or inspiration. Were they really mine? Had they been couriered up here, carted through the stone tunnel from the harbour, or were they merely imitations, printed out in some undiscovered hex and stretched across a canvas of exactly the right size? There were only two things that had not been in my city studio. The first, on the wall, was a perfect copy of Genticelli's Judith and Holofernes. I looked at my watch, just 6 hours or so since we had been discussing it. I wouldn't have put it past Pemberley to secure the original. The second new thing was a white envelope resting against one of my easels. I opened it. In a simple masculine hand, two words were written: "Welcome home." The flooring was the only thing not altered, but the floors in the two rooms were very similar, and presumably the island builders Pemberley had asked to complete the job had decided to leave it be. Of poor Mad Thomas's possessions, the bookshelves, the desk, the sofa, there was no sign. I left the cottage and walked the edge, examining the new room from the outside. The only sign of its construction was a thin white seam of plaster, a ridge running from top to bottom, very slightly damp, which must have been the building process here. I went back into the cottage to the office, now the studio, and sat in the wicker chair I'd had back in the city. Or in a copy of it, I couldn't tell. If Pemberley could create the island itself, of course he could create this, but his ability to reach into my life robbed me of my balance. I looked around the room dazed. The great hall at Hillcrest, my studio. What else on this island was an artful copy? Was Pemberley himself a clockwork man, a facsimile of an earlier model? Clearly, as well as the ability to create, he could destroy. First the rats, and now this. This had been the room of Mad Thomas, the writer, and now it was the room of Ben, the painter, and Thomas had been washed away in a single stroke. The patch of floor the wicker chair was positioned on was darker than the rest, less bleached by the sun, and I recalled there had been a rug over it, on which Thomas's desk had rested. I had noticed the awkward arrangement, the desk pinning the rug on the first arriving, then forgotten it. But when I remembered what Joanna had said about Thomas, Frank says he was paranoid, but that's not a nice thing to think of anybody, and I wondered why one would go to such trouble to keep a patch of floor covered. Francis had said something too. Thomas had stayed up late half the night, rearranging the furniture. I examined the floorboards more closely from end to end, and there, one of the boards had a gap at one end, just wide enough for an inserted tool to prise it upwards. I looked at it more closely. A fine shape had been carved at the corner, a curved and elaborate T. My painter's roll upstairs contained a metal ruler, thin but strong. I retrieved it and inserted as much of it as I could along the length of the board, then levered upwards. It didn't move. I tried again, and at last it came up. There was an alcove beneath the board, long and slim. It held a bizarre collection of jetsam. One of the metal snares Bianca had shown me in the tunnel, a few feathers, some dried flowers, wrapped tightly in waxy paper, a single glove, hand-stitched from the animal skin, and beneath all these was a tall black notebook, like those I had seen on Thomas's shelves on my first morning in the cottage. My scalp prickled. I opened the notebook. Inside the cover, in scratchy, uneven writing, was a name, Thomas Candler, followed by an address. He had lived in the city too, I noticed. The pages were lined, full of writing in the same hand. The notes began neatly marshalled, but as the pages went by, the discipline of writing within the lines seemed to have proved too much for him, and the writing had broken out, started occupying double heights or spinning off into elaborate diagrams sketched in rough ink. I took the book back to my chair in the corner and began to survey it in detail. The notebook itself was ordinary. The paper was of quality one rung over above pulp, and seemed almost to be waiting to return to the gloop it had come from. Once the owner of the book had finished with it, I had owned a couple myself. Nobody could ever have filled a notebook with quite such bizarre assortment of words and sketches as Thomas had. The first 50 pages veered apparently at random between diary entries, detailed sketches of flora and fauna, with the word native next to each one, aphorisms and scraps of verse, all cross-referenced to each other in the margins. Two questions began to dominate the book as I read on. What is in 41? And where are the rats? There were other phrases in here, phrases that made me question the other author's frame of mind. The words island within an island had been scratched on several pages. There were references to SJ scribbled throughout, sometimes JP or just J. There was a list of key players inside the back page. One of them, at the bottom of the list, was the new handmaiden, with a little pencil sketch of her, Kara. She must have arrived there soon before Thomas died. It was strange seeing Kara sketched by someone else, and yet the sketch was accurate enough to make my heart lurch. Halfway through, there was a rough attempt at a complete map of the place, which included the label 41, with an arrow drawn to a spot of land in the southeast of the island. The number seemed to have had significance for Thomas. It was scrawled repeatedly through the margins. In one place, 15 consecutive pages had all been neatly numbered 41 in the upper corners in a range of different styles, from Gothic to etiolated copperplate. The notes grew personal. The diary entries, initially in neat sentences, declined to scratched half lines. One read, in its entirety, "Followed again today. I dare not write more." Another said, "A man must hold the close the present and the future who does not have a past." And the third, rambling one described the living manifestation of the suicidal instinct of the species. Another pair of pages contained sketches of Pemberley, competent ones too. The following spread had more of the same man, where his features were twisted somehow, leaves writhing up his neck. A few pages on, his head was peeled open to reveal a monstrous flower. The final drawing in the series was only of a huge and ancient-looking bloom, with a suspicion of human features remaining. Francis and Joanna were right. Thomas had clearly had some terrible breakdown during his time here. At that moment I heard footsteps pass the window, close by, accompanied by voices I recognised. Francis and Joanna were outside. From where they were standing, they couldn't see the floorboard, and as they moved around to the front door, there was just time to push it back into place, shove the notebook into my pocket, and pretend to be looking at a nearby canvas before they came through. They were excited about the change to their home, thrilled apparently to learn that the room would be used again. It was so creepy when it was all abandoned, wasn't it, ducks? And according to the eagerly matched accounts, used by someone who wouldn't waste the opportunity of life on the island. I smiled awkwardly and showed them a few of my completed paintings, without admitting I was unable to tell whether or not Pemberley had cloned them. Neither of them seemed to notice my perturbation. The pair assured me with warmth that the installation of the studio was a mark of great favour from John, that I couldn't be luckier. "You'll be running the place this time next month," Francis smiled, and Joanna laughed and patted my arm. I knew Pemberley probably only wanted me here if it would make my Kara happy, but it gave me great pleasure. Clearly I was in better neighbour than the unhinged Thomas. They had come back to prepare dinner. Joanna ushered me and Francis upstairs, telling me to dress smartly in case your Karas suddenly come back, and Francis to wash the fields off his hands. When I got back downstairs, I just had time to turn on the radio and tune it in until I found a familiar station. The noise seemed fainter than it had done before when I last tried it. The presenter was saying something about restrictions, about the need for vigilance, about the short order in which normal life might be restored. But Francis was tumbling down the stairs and Joanna donning a cloak against the cold, and I switched the radio off. Whatever was happening on the mainland was unimportant here. Francis had stories from the day's work, and Joanna had an encouraging report on the baby, and the sky above us was high with orange shreds of cloud. We found a cart out at the front, readying itself to leave, crammed ourselves in with the others, and sped towards the hub along the quiet roads. John had been sincere in his invitation to dinner. I was greeted warmly at the door, and led once again to the top table. I recognised a few faces from the day as I passed along the aisles, and smiled and nodded my way to the dais. When I arrived, 2 other residents I hadn't met were already standing there, looking even more terrified than Francis and Joanna had done on my first night. The notebook was still in my pocket. I feared that if I left it at the cottage, someone might search my room in my absence. It felt uncomfortably large against my thigh. Even having it felt like an act of betrayal against Pemberley and the island. It had been written by a clearly paranoid man. Then again, was I equally paranoid to worry that somebody else would search my studio? That was chapter 17, so things warming up and getting quite interesting. I wonder what's going to happen when he goes to paint Pemberley probably in the morning after dinner, or what's going to happen at dinner first. So let's find out in the next chapter. Join me for chapter 17 from Florence.